Normandy, June 1944. A German Tiger tank sat tucked behind a hedgerow, engine rumbling low, almost like a big cat holding its breath. Inside, the commander leaned into his periscope and scanned the narrow country road ahead. There they were, Allied tanks creeping forward in a line, Shermans, 5 of them. To an experienced German tank crew in 1944, that sight usually didn't feel like a crisis. It felt like work. The Tiger's main gun was built for this. At long range, it could punch through a Sherman before the Sherman could do much back. So the commander did what he'd done over and over: count targets, pick the lead vehicle, set up the shot. Range estimate, loader ready, gunner steady. One clean hit and the column would freeze, then burn. And if you like these WWII deep dives, where we break down what really happened and why it mattered, tap subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. The Tiger's gunner settled the crosshairs. The commander's brain ran through the familiar math. The Sherman's 75mm gun on most models just didn't have the bite to handle a Tiger from the front at this distance. Not reliably, not fast, not before the Tiger fired first. Everything about the last 2 years of combat told them this would be routine. Then the routine snapped. A Sherman that wasn't even in the front, one sitting slightly back in the formation, fired first. Not a bunch of shots, not a lucky swarm. One shot. The round flew across the field so fast it felt like it arrived before the sound fully caught up. And it didn't just smack the Tiger's armor and bounce. It cut through the front plate, exactly the place Tiger crews trusted most, and exploded inside the fighting compartment. For a fraction of a second, the commander didn't understand what he was seeing, because what just happened wasn't supposed to happen. Then the inside of the tank became fire, pressure, smoke, and metal. When German troops later pulled a survivor from the wreck, he kept repeating the same stunned idea, like his brain was stuck on it. How? How did a Sherman do that? German officers examined the destroyed Tiger. They studied the angle. They measured the penetration. They compared notes with other units. And a cold realization spread through German armored forces in Normandy. Somewhere among the ordinary Shermans, the same tanks German crews believed they could handle, there was a different kind of Sherman. A Sherman that could kill a Tiger. And the worst part wasn't just that it existed. The worst part was that you couldn't reliably spot it until it fired. Within weeks, German crews would learn its name, the Firefly. And after that, tank fights in the West would never feel routine again. To understand why this one vehicle hit German tankers so hard, you have to rewind a little. Back before Normandy, when German confidence wasn't just bravado, it was built on experience. By mid-1944, German armored crews had been fighting Shermans for nearly 2 years. North Africa, Sicily, Italy. They'd seen Shermans used in huge numbers. They'd watched brave Allied crews push forward under awful odds. And they'd learned a harsh lesson. The standard Sherman, for all its strengths, wasn't designed to trade punches head-on with the German heavy hitters. The most common Sherman variant in Allied units carried a 75mm gun. It was a solid weapon for many jobs. High explosive rounds for infantry support, decent performance against lighter vehicles, and the ability to handle older German tanks under the right conditions. But against a Tiger or Panther from the front, that was a different story. German crews didn't just think they had the advantage. They had numbers, results, and repeated battlefield proof. In many direct duels, German tanks could hit and penetrate Shermans at ranges where the Shermans struggled to do the same back. That range gap shaped everything. It shaped tactics. It shaped morale. It shaped the way German tankers felt when they saw Shermans. German doctrine leaned hard into long-range fighting. Use superior optics, take hull-down positions, control the engagement, keep your strongest armor facing the enemy, let the enemy close into your kill zone while you stay just out of theirs. When it worked, it looked almost mechanical. Shermans advance. German tanks fire from concealment. Shermans burn. Survivors reverse away or get knocked out trying to get close enough for a flank shot. Now, to be clear, this didn't mean Shermans were bad tanks. Shermans were reliable, easier to maintain, and available in huge numbers. They supported infantry well, and Allied forces got smarter about combining tanks with artillery, smoke, air power, and infantry to crack German positions. But in the narrow, Brutal logic of a tank versus tank duel, especially against a Tiger or a Panther, German crews usually felt like they were the ones setting the rules. That created a psychological imbalance. If you're a German crew inside a Tiger and you believe the enemy can't reliably hurt you from the front at range, you fight differently. You stay calmer. You take your time. You commit to shots you're confident will work. Meanwhile, Allied crews had to compensate. They used terrain. They tried to close distance under fire. They attempted to overwhelm with numbers. Sometimes they succeeded, especially with teamwork and surprise, but the basic math problem of armor and gun performance still hung over every encounter, and German tankers noticed. Over time, many of them developed a grim view of the Sherman, respect for the men inside it, but contempt for the machine's ability to survive a direct hit. In some units, Shermans even picked up nicknames tied to how easily they could catch fire after penetration, so when German intelligence heard the Allies were landing in Normandy with huge numbers of Shermans, a lot of experienced German tank commanders didn't panic. They'd fought Shermans before. They believed they understood Shermans. They believed their Tigers and Panthers would still dominate any fair tank fight. Better guns, thicker armor, longer effective range. What they didn't fully grasp yet was this. Mixed into British and Canadian Sherman units were tanks that looked normal at a glance, but carried a gun that changed the entire threat picture. A gun strong enough to punch through German heavy armor at real combat distances. And once that secret entered the battlefield, every Sherman silhouette in the hedgerows became a question. Is it a regular Sherman, or is it the one that can kill you? And in Normandy, you often got your answer only after a single flash, followed by impact. June to early July 1944. The first confirmed reports came in so fast that German crews barely had time to compare notes. One moment, Tiger and Panther units were fighting the way they always had. The next, tanks that should have been safe at range were being punched through from the front. One incident near Villers-Bocage rattled German commanders in particular. A Tiger, one of the most feared machines on the battlefield, was moving carefully through orchards and hedgerows. The commander was a veteran trained on the Eastern Front. He followed doctrine to the letter. Stay partially hidden, observe first, engage from distance. Through his optics, he spotted a Sherman moving between hedgerows at roughly 800 meters. The silhouette was unmistakable. Boxy hull, rounded turret, nothing unusual. This should have been easy. The Tiger's gunner lined up the shot. The loader confirmed an armor-piercing round was ready. The commander gave the order, but the Sherman fired first. Not the familiar, duller report German crews associated with the standard 75 millimeter. This sound was sharper, harder, almost violent. The round crossed the distance in what felt like no time at all and slammed straight into the Tiger's frontal armor. Not a glancing hit, not a crack. A clean penetration. Inside the Tiger, ammunition detonated. Pressure ripped through the fighting compartment. The turret, several tons of steel, shifted on its ring before slumping at an angle. Of the 5-man crew, only the driver survived, blown clear by the explosion. When recovery teams examined the wreck, confusion turned into alarm. The penetration looked like something caused by a German 88 millimeter or worse. But witnesses insisted it was a Sherman that fired. That made no sense. Shermans weren't supposed to do that. Not from the front. Not at that distance. Within days, more reports piled up. A Panther destroyed by frontal penetration near Caen. Attacker identified as a Sherman. Another Tiger disabled outside Tilly-sur-Seulles. Again, a Sherman. Again, a frontal hit at a range that should have been safe. German tank commanders began asking the same questions in briefings and reports. Had the Allies upgraded their guns? Was this a new American design? Were British units fielding something different? German intelligence scrambled for answers. Captured Allied tank crews were questioned, but most of them couldn't explain what had happened. Many Sherman crews genuinely didn't know much about the weapon beyond the basics. To them, it was just another tank in the troop, usually one assigned a specific role. Wrecked Allied vehicles were examined whenever possible. But early inspections didn't help much. The key difference, the gun was longer, yes, but not always obvious in shattered remains or under battlefield conditions. For a short but dangerous window, German armor was fighting an enemy it couldn't properly identify. And that uncertainty hit hard. One Panther commander described his experience in a report that circulated through armored units. His unit engaged a group of Shermans at roughly 1,000 meters. Standard procedure. 3 Shermans were destroyed before they could fire effectively. Then a 4th Sherman, indistinguishable from the rest, fired once. The Panther's frontal armor was penetrated. The loader was killed. The gunner wounded. The crew abandoned the tank. Afterward, the commander examined the destroyed Sherman. Only then did he notice the gun looked longer than usual. In combat, he hadn't seen it. That moment marked a psychological break. German tank crews were used to facing dangerous enemies. On the Eastern Front, they had fought massive Soviet formations. They dealt with T-34s and heavy tanks that were obviously threats the moment you saw them. This was different. Now the danger hid inside something familiar. By late June, German intelligence finally identified the culprit. British forces were deploying a modified Sherman armed with a powerful anti-tank gun known as the 17-pounder. This was the same weapon used in towed anti-tank units, capable of penetrating heavy armor at long range. Mounted on a Sherman chassis, it created something unexpected: the Firefly. On paper, the explanation made sense. The 17-pounder had the penetration to threaten Tigers and Panthers from the front. It could do damage at ranges German crews believed were safe. But the real problem wasn't just technical, it was visual. At a glance, a Firefly looked like any other Sherman. Same hull, same general turret shape, same overall profile. Yes, the barrel was longer, but in real combat with smoke, dust, foliage, broken terrain, and limited time, that difference was easy to miss. And missing it could get you killed. Once the realization spread, fear followed quickly. German crews understood what this meant almost immediately. If Fireflies were mixed into Sherman formations, then every Sherman became a potential threat. You could no longer dismiss them as targets that could be handled at leisure. A Tiger commander summed it up in blunt terms after the fact. "We used to hunt Shermans. Now we fear them. Not all of them, but we cannot know which ones." That uncertainty poisoned the confidence German armor had relied on since 1942. Instead of seeing Shermans as inferior opponents that needed numbers or luck to win, German crews now had to assume danger, even at long range. Every engagement demanded faster decisions, sharper observation, and harder choices, and hesitation in armored combat was deadly. German doctrine shifted almost overnight. Units were instructed to identify and destroy Fireflies first, even before engaging other Allied tanks. Briefings focused on recognition details: longer gun barrel, altered turret layout, sometimes a different antenna position. In theory, this should have restored order. In practice, it made everything worse. The differences were subtle. At 800 or 1,000 meters under fire, those details blurred. Gunners hesitated, trying to confirm what they were seeing. Commanders delayed shots they would previously have taken instantly. Meanwhile, British crews adapted. They learned quickly that German tanks were hunting Fireflies specifically, so they leaned into the confusion. Fireflies stayed mixed with standard Shermans. They avoided obvious silhouettes. They used terrain to hide their longer barrels until the moment of firing. The result was a deadly guessing game. German crews had to decide: shoot the Sherman that might be a Firefly, or wait and risk being hit first. Commit too early, and you might waste your shot. Wait too long, and you might never get one. By early July, something fundamental had changed. German tankers no longer felt in control of the engagement the moment Shermans appeared. Instead, every encounter started with doubt. And doubt, once it took hold, was hard to shake. July to August 1944. Once German commanders accepted that the Firefly was real and deadly, the next step was survival. Orders went out fast. Fireflies had to be identified and destroyed first. Anything with a long barrel became priority target number 1. Briefings drilled the details into crews. Look for the longer gun tube. Watch for the slightly altered turret shape. Pay attention to antenna placement. Use infantry observers. Use recon. Don't assume. On paper, it sounded manageable. On the battlefield, it was a nightmare. Normandy wasn't open desert or rolling steppe. It was hedgerows, orchards, sunken lanes, ruined villages, smoke, dust, and constant movement. Visibility was often measured in seconds, not minutes. At 900 meters, through a periscope streaked with dust, a Sherman was a Sherman. German gunners tried to read shadows, barrel length, angles, but tanks didn't sit still and pose for identification. They moved, they reversed, they fired and disappeared behind cover, and British crews knew exactly what the Germans were trying to do. Standard Shermans began painting fake muzzle brakes on their 75mm guns to make the barrels look longer. Antennas were repositioned to confuse observers. Firefly crews added foliage or canvas to break up the outline of their barrels. Most importantly, Fireflies stayed mixed in with regular Shermans. If you saw 5 Shermans, one of them might be a Firefly. If you saw one Sherman alone, it almost certainly was. That uncertainty bled into every German decision. A German tank ace later described the shift perfectly. Before the Firefly, German crews dictated the fight. They chose range, timing, and angles. After the Firefly, caution crept in. And caution meant delay. Delay gave the Allies time to maneuver, time to call artillery, time to bring infantry forward with anti-tank weapons, time to swarm. The Firefly didn't just threaten German armor physically, it attacked German tempo. German doctrine had always relied on quick, decisive action. Spot the enemy. Fire first. Maintain initiative. The Firefly made that risky. Now, if you fired at the wrong Sherman first, the real threat might kill you seconds later. German crews began to hesitate, just a moment longer than before. That hesitation was enough. British commanders noticed. They began using Fireflies as bait, placing them where German tanks were likely to see them first. German gunners would fixate on the suspected Firefly, sometimes exposing their flanks to standard Shermans maneuvering into better positions. The battlefield turned into a brutal game of misdirection. German crews learned to recognize the sound of the 17-pounder firing. It wasn't the same as the standard Sherman gun. Veterans could tell the difference instantly, but that recognition came after the shot. And if the Firefly fired first, recognition didn't help much. A Panther commander captured after his tank was destroyed near Caen described the mental strain. He said every engagement felt like a test he could fail without knowing it. You see 3 Shermans. One has to be a Firefly. But which one? You pick, you fire, you hit. Relief, until the second Sherman fires and you realize you chose wrong. Those seconds between the muzzle flash and the impact, he said, were the longest seconds of his life. By midsummer, German crews developed dark humor to cope. A common saying spread through units. If you see 5 Shermans, 1 is a Firefly. If you see 4, the 5th is somewhere you aren't looking. And if you see 1 Sherman alone, it's definitely a Firefly. It was a joke, but not really. The Firefly forced German crews to treat every Sherman as potentially lethal. That erased the psychological hierarchy they had relied on for years. Tigers and Panthers were still powerful, but they no longer felt safe. This fear showed up in reports. German tank units began withdrawing sooner when encountering Sherman formations. They waited longer before firing. They demanded infantry support before advancing. Some crews abandoned tanks earlier than expected after hearing the crack of a 17-pounder, assuming penetration even before confirming damage. Veteran crews, men who had survived brutal fighting in Russia, were suddenly cautious to the point of frustration for their commanders. The fear wasn't irrational. The Firefly punished mistakes instantly. A Tiger engaging Shermans from a textbook hull-down position could destroy 1, maybe 2, before a Firefly hidden on the flank fired from an angle the crew hadn't scanned carefully enough. And that was the real danger. Not the Firefly you could see, but the one you didn't know was there. German after-action reports show a clear shift in behavior. Engagements became more defensive. Requests for artillery support increased whenever Fireflies were suspected. Tank commanders demanded better reconnaissance before committing. British intelligence monitoring German communications noticed the tone change. German radio traffic, once calm and methodical, became tense and urgent around Allied armor. The Firefly had introduced something German crews hated: uncertainty. On the Eastern Front, Soviet tanks were dangerous, but obvious. You could see them coming. You could count them. You could plan around them. The Firefly hid among tanks you weren't supposed to fear. That constant scanning, every hedgerow, every gap, every silhouette, took a toll. Hour after hour, day after day, crews became exhausted before the fight even started. A German gunner interrogated after losing his Panther described the stress plainly. Every movement felt risky. Every decision felt final. If you moved too aggressively, you exposed yourself. If you hesitated, you lost initiative. And always, always you were looking for a Firefly you might never see until it was firing. By August 1944, German armored units in Normandy weren't just losing tanks. They were losing confidence. And once confidence was gone, Everything else followed. Because armored warfare wasn't just about steel and firepower, it was about believing just enough that your tank would keep you alive. The Firefly shattered that belief, and the damage was far from over.